Hi, I'm here with Tim Keller, running for mayor here in Albuquerque. Tim, thanks for being here with us today, first and foremost. Don't want to take up too much of your time, so let's get right into it. A lot has been made about how you are the first publicly, not the first, but the only publicly funded candidate for mayor here in Albuquerque this time around. And that to me is inspiring. It's inspired me to chase the distinction of Albuquerque's only publicly funded comedian. What sort of tips would you have for that?
Well, one, I think you got to remind folks it's a choice, right? I'm sure you could have gone into some sort of job that would have paid you a gazillion dollars, but you chose to do that because you think it's the right thing to do. And that was the same for me in public financing. I've run other campaigns in the traditional big money model. And look, even after the last presidential primary, with what happened with Bernie and things like that, I decided, you know what, if there's a choice to actually do this differently, I'm going to do it. And luckily, 6,000 folks gave us $5, and that's what it took to get it done. It was super hard to get. That would be the other thing I would warn you about if there's a qualification period.
Well, stand-up comedy is pretty hard, actually. 6,000 people give me $5. I can usually get about 15 people to come to a show. So it sounds like that's going to
So there you can do, that was actually the same math. So if I had 15 people come into a house party, you know, I would have had to have 300 house parties. But I think if I'm doing that right, I pulled it off with 100 in 5 weeks. That's the only way to do it. So it's actually a little bit similar.
It's doable. Okay.
Yeah, you can do it.
Well, so despite being the publicly funded candidate, how do you respond to allegations that big money players like the sheet metal workers who gave $2,500, Senator Fred Harris who gave $250 to Albuquerque Forward Together, people accuse you of having your cake and eating it too with an organization like that? How do you respond to that?
You know, I think there's a couple of things about that. I mean, one is it's not a level playing field. And I think what happened is we had this public finance system, but then they changed the rules and you don't get a matching funding. So now, like if you're publicly financed, you're at a huge disadvantage. And what folks are saying who are kind enough to help out is they're basically like, well, we should step in because this guy made a tough choice and we want it to be a fair, financially, you know, level playing field. So I think there are PACs helping everyone, and so I guess in many ways I'm grateful at least one of them is trying to help me. But it's all legal, and it's just where we're at as a system now. And folks have a right to help whoever they want to help, however they want to do it, and I think that's what these folks are doing.
Yeah. Well, I think if you got a cake, what else are you going to do but eat it? You know, you're just going to let it sit around and go bad. So speaking of big money, your big splash as state auditor was to find $4.5 billion in unspent funds in state bank accounts. So what I'm wondering is what happened to all that? We spend that?
You know, the amazing thing when I came out with that, folks said, well, that's not real. You know, it doesn't exist. And we were like, well, it came from their own, you know, government's audited financials and this and that. And so here's what happened to it. Over the last 18 months, the legislature actually took $900 million of it to plug our budget deficit. So that actually probably is a good thing because we didn't have to raise taxes or fire people. But my point is, it was definitely real. And that's what they did with a big chunk of that money. And so there's not as much there now because it's been swept and clawed back and these kinds of terms they use. But at the end of the day, our point is that money should have never been there in the first place. That's our taxpayer money. It should have been out in our communities for projects for our communities.
Right. So doesn't it concern you then that should you actually win the mayoral race, you will be vacating that office for 13 months and the governor is going to just put whoever in? Is that correct?
You know, if this works out, there'd be about a 9-month gap before we'd be able to elect a new state auditor. So folks will have a choice in 9 months. And I think the irony is anyone who's familiar with auditing, which is almost no one, what you can do in 9 months as a state auditor is almost nothing. Because the cycle is annual. These are annual audits, even the study you mentioned. And so 9 months of a state auditor isn't going to make a whole lot of difference one way or the other. But it's been a wonderful job. I've loved it, and I wish the timing was different. But at the end of the day, I got to step up for my hometown.
Sure.
And so I think we'll be okay with 9 months no matter who's in there.
Yeah. Why does New Mexico always suspect ambition?
There's an old fable which is ironic because it's about crabs, and there's not a lot of crabs in New Mexico, but it's the crabs in the bucket kind of thing. And I think we've always, I think we should celebrate folks who want to do good, and we should hold them up and we should champion them. And so, but unfortunately, it's not always that way.
Okay. Let's. Your website says that you're not only a fan, but a devotee of metal. So we got to talk about metal. Who's your favorite metal band, first of all?
Oh man, I think as a true fan, it's hard to answer that. I like Sepultura a lot. Of course, the big four: Anthrax, Megadeth, Slayer. Lots of thrash in there.
Sure.
Sometimes I'll go more sort of softer with bands like Caius, who I love. And lately a lot of the more modern bands are actually from Sweden and Europe, and so I've been into the new wave of Swedish death metal and some other things like that. And Mastodon, I'm going to check them out in October.
It's the Swedish death metal that used the sort of snuff photos for their album covers, right? Isn't that a Finland?
That's the Well, that
Finnish.
might be the Finnish, or the Norwegian ones are the church burners, and I don't think the Swedish guys are doing that. At least not the ones I've got. But who sees album covers anyway now? It's all
true.
digital.
Yeah.
I couldn't even tell you half the album covers.
That's too bad, right? Lost art, especially
It is.
with metal.
It is.
Metal are the ultimate album covers.
They actually I was an art history major, and some of their album covers are pretty cool.
Yeah, Eddie and all that stuff.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
How do you feel about prog rock?
I like. It depends how you want to categorize it, but I like Prong. They were, to me, one of the, early on that. So I like some product. Early Savatage, believe it or not, that's like going back in the 80s.
Yeah.
But now, more modern stuff. I mean, I think I like it to the extent that it's probably about like 10% of my collection, but I lean much more towards probably thrash and speed metal.
Okay, right on. What's your go-to karaoke jam?
That's tough because I can barely sing at all. But I'll usually try some Pantera or Metallica. Usually is low-hanging fruit on the karaoke tree.
Yeah.
So I'll go with that.
Well, you give the people what they want at karaoke.
Yeah. You don't want to freak them out, with something too out there.
Yeah. Which I go Joy Division. And
oh, really?
Clear the floor. Clear the floor. Ian
Joy
Curtis
Division.
is in my range.
I haven't heard that in a long time.
So would you consider going to do karaoke with us sometime?
I'm just such a bad singer, and all I can do is metal, and I'm not even good at that. So, I might pop in, but I gotta say, karaoke's not my thing. I mean, I listen. I don't really perform. I have no musical talent at all.
Sorry, Sheridan, I tried. So anyway, speaking of brutality, let's talk about crime. When Mayor Barry put out his 2010 crime plan, it had 16 points, and I, for one, was really impressed with that number of points. But now, 7 years later, it's been whittled down to 5 points. I don't know where those other 11 points went. I don't know if I did the math right on that. But on your website, you have 62 points, counted them all, on your crime plan. How do we know that in 7 years, that's not going to be whittled down to like 5 puny points? Because when it comes to a crime plan, I need points, lots of points, Chris Hardwick level points.
Then our crime plan is definitely for you. We've got the most points of any crime plan. But, I think this is one where that's what it takes right now. And so we have so many challenges in our public safety system and in our community around this, that I really felt like we needed to actually be policy wonks and dive into it. And so I think, if anything, that's going to get bigger. But I hope that folks can hold me accountable to it, and our city, and we can check off what worked, what didn't. And at the end of the day, we'll have a whole lot of things crossed off because they actually were done. And
that's the best way to take points off the plan.
Exactly, is to actually do them. And, I think the irony, I have a copy of the chief's plan when he came in, and his 90-day plan, I think, had 5 points.
That's not
enough. And that was the 90-day plan. I think he could have done them all in one day. So anyway, I do think this is an issue where it's complex. So we should honor that, and that's why we have a complex crime plan. But I think it really does approach crime from all sides, and that's what we've got to do.
Well, it's comprehensive. When I first looked at the education portion, I was dismayed that there were only 2 points made. But then I noticed that a lot of education issues were tied into your crime plan, things like making law enforcement a viable career choice for high school students and that sort of thing, which just kind of creates a pipeline between APS and APD. Is that the strategy to get people to stay here in Albuquerque, is to make them cops?
For a certain percentage, I think it's good to have a police force that reflects our community and is from our community. So I think it would be great if folks are policing the same neighborhood that they grew up in. Now, obviously, that's not a plan that scales to the thousands of folks that we want to keep here in New Mexico with a good job. And so that's why we've got a jobs plan, too. And it actually will be finalizing that, I think, this week.
Oh, great.
But it really is about how do we actually provide a career for people? And I think we have been trying to provide a job. So we've said, here's an entry-level job at like a call center. And I had one of those at MCI, actually. And it was a great entry-level job.
Them.
But there's, no way up. That's why they're here. And if we invest in our small local businesses, we can actually, you can see that path to ownership or to being an executive, owning your own business. That's what we've got to do instead of just providing a job when you're young.
Awesome. So just to get into a couple of more of the points on your crime plan, one of the things you mentioned was to expand the current CABQ standards for entry into the police academy to match the state standards. And it got me wondering what sort of restrictions are preventing qualified candidates from joining the police academy, that loosening that up. Like what sort of things are we talking about?
There's a lot around even like the physical fitness test at the end of the academy. And, this is one where people might not pass it, but look, let's let them take it again in 6 months and not have to go through this whole process again. Or there's different minor things in people's background, whether it's very minor recreational drug use from 10 years ago, things like that we might want to look at. And some of it is educational. I believe that not everyone needs to go to college, and a college degree doesn't make you a good cop. And so I think we should look at those educational standards and say, as long as you're getting the right training and as long as you're getting education and things that you need, like an associate's degree or a program from C&M, that's fine. Not everyone has to have a bachelor's degree in something just to be a cop.
Okay, yeah, those don't sound too intense. Another point you made in your crime plan was to get rid of acronym-based programs and plans. What's your problem with acronyms? WTF?
LOL, I can't remember them. And so my problem with them is I think they're a proxy for addressing a real issue. And what we've seen is, this is classic Albuquerque City Hall right now. There's a problem, then all of a sudden there's a press release with some task force or team that is supposed to make a difference. And 3 months later, they're gone or they're ineffective. It's almost mostly for PR purposes or to make us sort of feel better in the short term. And I think we've seen that a lot in policing. And so we've got to get back to basic precinct by precinct, block by block policing, and a rotation where folks get to know a community and they might stay there 4, 5, 6 years and then rotate out. That's how we get back sort of community policing and trust in policing. It's not by having a 3-month, acronym team to crack down on something. That's how we get this whack-a-mole strategy where it's like, here's one issue, bam, we'll put a SWAT team on it and have a special team for it, and then it's gone. And then something else pops up here, and that team has to go over there, and we never make a net gain.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So before I let you go, I want to talk about the company that you keep, quote unquote. You've received endorsements from former elected officials, every labor union that I personally can think of, plus many more because I can only think of the one.
There's a lot, dozens.
Both feminist organizations like Planned Parenthood and Nasty Women. Do you consider yourself a nasty woman?
I consider myself a kindred spirit, that's for sure.
Okay.
Regardless of how you feel about their name, they stand for some really important issues. And I love that they're just out there owning it. And so I think for me, a lot of these organizations, they see two things, hopefully, in me as a future mayor. One, someone who will stand up for values and issues that I think are important, and I have a track record of doing that in the Senate and as auditor. And so they actually believe that I'll be there for them because I've been there for them in the past. And I think the second thing is they recognize what it takes to get things done. It actually is a lot easier to run for office and do a bunch of debates and have the talking points than it is to actually come down and get a bill or an ordinance that can actually get the votes to become law, or to make a procurement code decision or an HR decision or a contract decision or a leadership decision. It is really, really much, much harder to govern than it is to campaign. And I think that's what I'm fortunate to have a little bit of experience in, and I think that's what people respect even if they disagree with me.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Comedy's the same way. You can comedy campaign all day, but when you have to perform, it's difficult. So I got a couple of questions from anonymous city employees that I just want to bounce a few of these off of you. For the record, I think Nasty Women is a great name. But
there's a guy equivalent, the something nasty or hombres, bad hombres. There's a guy equivalent, just so you know.
Between the two, I think I fall. Anyway, it's a spectrum. Everybody knows that. Anyways, one of the questions we got from an anonymous city employee as it concerns nepotism. It says, quote, "I've noticed appointed people have reclassified lower paying positions to much higher paid ones for close friends, colleagues, and positions being earmarked and slated for certain people that disregard the city process. Will you and how would you be transparent about combating nepotism?"
This is a good one, and it's something we fight every day as state auditor in New Mexico. So it's an issue I'm familiar with. And I think this is a really good example of two things. The fact that I'm doing public financing literally makes me beholden to 6,000 people who gave me $5, and that's definitely not about nepotism. Whereas I think a lot of other candidates, they take a lot of money from certain folks who want contracts or jobs. And so I don't have that conflict. The second thing is, this is why it's important to have a mayor who understands how to deal with HR issues. Believe it or not, if you're in government, and I've dealt with this in even our own office, you have got to have transparent hiring policies. And if there's a friend of yours who wants a job, you better make sure you're not involved in that process. And you've got to set up safeguards against that. And luckily, I've actually worked on that quite a bit throughout state government. And so it's one of those things that's very kind of detail-oriented and not really glamorous, but I think that question is spot on. And I've got a great track record of that in the auditor's office, and I think that should bode well for the mayor's office.
Excellent. So the final question. The director of a division worked roughly 3 decades to top out at $60,000. Meanwhile, a junior position in the same department makes that much in less than half the time. Do you feel that is equitable or just?
I don't, and this is endemic throughout City Hall, throughout the city government. What's happened is the natural, normal, expected career path trajectory, kind of up that management pyramid, has been totally chipped away at and eroded by this administration. And so even in the police department, all of a sudden we have inconsistent promotion and inconsistent discipline. And those two things are literally, we talk about how there's low morale in city government. Those are the two biggest drivers of it. And so you've got to return to a transparent process that is fair and predictable and consistent. And that's something actually that I think very few folks are even aware of. It's something that I think is extremely important to restoring pride in our city and for working for our city. You can't have that if you're getting treated different than the person next to you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now this is we got a news-biting last-minute question came in. This is what we want you to do here is finish the lyrics. This is a Sepultura song.
Ooh.
I say, we're growing every day, getting stronger in every way. I'll take you to a place where we shall find our
Soulfly.
I'm afraid.
Because that's the band that came after Sepultura with the lead singer, but I feel like that's a Soulfly song. But I'm trusting your reading. Anyway, the short answer is you got me.
Uh-oh.
You got me.
We were looking for Roots, Bloody Roots.
Oh, that is brutal, because it's one of my favorite songs.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, one thing in metal, sometimes you don't even know the
spot.
lyrics because they're so hard to understand.
To be fair, I probably should have been screaming them at you. Anyway, that's okay.
Yeah. Well,
hey.
I saw him, right at the right here in Albuquerque in that concert, like when I was in high school. It was a great show, one of the best shows I've ever been to.
Wow.
So that's what I remember as opposed to the lyrics, unfortunately.
I should have screamed it. I apologize. Well, sometimes the news bites, and sometimes the news is biting, and we bit you. I apologize. But thank you so much for your time, Tim.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Tim Keller, everybody.